what you want to cover, I think, a bit too.
Well, I'll cover the way I see. Well, it comes back to what you were saying. The Scottish history was we wanted to get as far away from it, so we never came back to Fallbrook. And then how I came back to the history. I never even knew Jim existed till last year. I didn't know any of the cousins. So,
The prodigal has returned, you would say.
both prodigals. My name is Sandy McKay, and I'm named after Uncle Sandy, great Uncle Sandy McKay, who is the eldest son of the patriarch Donald Mackay. We call ourselves McKay, but that apparently is a misnomer. We are Mackays. Do you know why? Do you know the difference between McKay and Mackay? I don't.
There isn't. It's all Mackay.
Right.
And it's because of the way it's spelt. I think people when they read it, they just automatically read McKay. It's Kay.
It's the same clan, and it's not a...
Yeah.
Yes.
They're all
But
the same.
people be trying to get away from the... were they embarrassed about being...
I don't think so. I think it's just a mispronunciation.
Okay,
At least that's what my dad told me.
Because we're all McKays. Okay, so... and my connections with Fallbrook go back to the 50s because... which actually Fallbrook was not owned by our family anymore. It had been sold by my great uncle Sandy to the Vaughn family, T. Edens, in '43, and it had become a very fancy hybrid horse farm and cattle farm. So it was not at all like, but we would come back a couple of times in the 50s to visit Uncle Sandy when he lived in his new home in Silver Creek, and his wife, no, I think she was already dead. He was living with his sister, Aunt Katie, and Kate, that's who I remember. And of course in the film, in the picture, they just looked like, straight out of a history book.
Croft,
They look like prairie farmers going back 100 years with the pitchfork, and the memory is they lived very simply, and I remember them. This is prejudice. A good story about them was the memory I have is going and picking strawberries with my mother, and because they had a lot of strawberries at Fallbrook, and then where they moved to, they had strawberries too. There were a lot of strawberries. It was a big thing having strawberries, and we picked the strawberries, and then my mother put them in the car. He told my mother, "Well, that'll cost you $12." And it was $12, and that was back in the 50s. I remember that. I don't think we ever went back after that. And but my brother Bob and his wife Mark, they kept up the connection. They visited often, but I never came back to this area at all until last October, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. Finally, I decided I wanted to go to Scotland. I was curious about the roots and sort of proud about being a Celt and a Scot, but found life quite difficult being a Scot, in the sense pretty pig-headed, and no wall is too thick for us to hit against, and anyways, I found myself, at least as a personality, much more Scot than I thought I wanted to be. But we got away from Fallbrook because our grandfather, David, Aunt Rachel's father, and my father's father, who lived in Owen Sound and brought his family up in Owen Sound, lived with us in his last years for a couple of years. He lived with Aunt Rachel too, and he was not an easy man. He was a very difficult man. He was stubborn, ornery. He expected women to be at his beck and call, and you worked. You worked all his life, and all our lives, or my father's lives, we were expected to work. And he didn't smile much, if I remember quickly. He was really the exception to the rule of the other McKays, as I remember him. And you weren't happy. Around him you didn't know happiness. I mean, this idea of Sandy fiddling and stuff is totally new to me. So for this reason, and I don't think we certainly are not the only family. I think in Scot culture and Scot society, there is a mentality like that, especially in the mountain areas or in the very isolated areas, that sort of culture, which is very strict.
The phrase is the dour Scots.
The Dower Scots, that's right. Yes, the Dower Scots. And this was specifically, getting back to Aunt Rachel, this was specifically hard on her because her mother died when she was 14 and she was pulled right out of school, and then she had to take care. Well, no, the first 2 or 3 years her aunt came from Fallbrook, was sent up from Fallbrook, Aunt Ellen, to take care of the house. But after a couple of years, my grandfather, her father, Aunt Rachel's father, decided she was too much. Didn't want her, maybe she wasn't. Anyways, she was sent back to Fallbrook, the Mackay farm, Uncle Sandy's farm, and Rachel was taken out of school at 14. And her life just from then on turned around serving and doing what she was supposed to do. She didn't finish school, and then she married and sort of continued that same sort of life, but much happier until her husband died, when she made a life of her own. So,
Move ahead to your trip to Scotland, I think.
okay, good. Thank you. So last year I went back to Scotland and in Glasgow, or no, 2 summers ago. And Glasgow through the Highlands. I didn't travel much. I went mostly to isolated areas, which are what I like, trying to meet the people. And very hard to get away from tourist areas. So I picked the most isolated place I could find, which was Jurness. Jurness in the northwest. It's the most northern western village. About 200 people, all Mackays. It's the center of the Mackays, and I didn't know anybody there, and I went there, hoping to meet people or just and ironically, well, when I first got there, I went to the hostel, and it was cold and rainy and miserable, as it always can be in Scotland.
It's
And
very new.
huh?
How new?
Yeah, right. How new, especially up on the North Shore, the North Coast, eh? And I spent a day in the regular youth hostel and got kicked out of there. And so I went to another youth hostel, and I met a young artist and learned that there was a special festival. It was the John Lennon Festival, because Lennon and his mother, her family comes from Jurness. And he used to summer there. So this was the first year they were trying to bring tourists to Jurness, and they were having the Lennon Festival, and I volunteered to work on it, but I didn't have a place to stay because it was all reserved, sold out everywhere. And I was going to leave on the Friday morning because it was not, I couldn't sleep out on the Highlands. And I was working at the school, and the school director, Graham Bruce, and his wife Jill, who live, it's the old typical school house with the school right beside it. We were setting up this artist display, and he came along and was very friendly, and we talked, and I said, well, I come from Canada. He spoke of coming over to Canada. He has family here, his aunt is here, and his uncle, who is now dead. And they first came over in 1963 to work on a farm here, which is now a historical site, and it was by chance near Georgetown. Well, I say my family's ancestral home is a historical site. It was a farm, and it took us 48 hours to confirm, but it was the same place. By pure hazard, in all of Scotland, and this is true, we connected through, and that's how I connected back to Fallbrook. I had no intention of coming here. It wasn't even on my agenda. I was interested in following the roots, especially in, more about learning why we are what we are, which is very important. And so we had a tremendous weekend. It was, it's a small little village, and I met all the people. I was working and really had the time of my life, worked hard and enjoyed it. And it was a very successful festival too. And lots of dancing. not many bagpipes though. You'll have to come next time. And so we learned about the farm, and when I came back, we came and visited with, the first day I got back, I had the intention of coming back here, and Kathy Keir, who is his aunt, who lived on the farm, the Fallbrook farm, from 1963 to 1977. They were Scots who came over, immigrated over here, promised a job in 1963. When they got here, there was no job, and so they started looking. They were they managed a farm. They were farm managers in Scotland near Aberdeen, and so he started to look as a farm manager and found this job up here in Georgetown. And by chance we've connected. She phoned me right away the next morning, and I came over here and we went and saw the farm. As you can see it here, it looks like this. And we didn't even understand then, but then we later learned that it was to be demolished by the Ontario government, Credit Valley Conservation, because they considered that it was a blight on the nature. And so that's a whole other story, but that's how the story began. And that's how I became, the more that through this home I have met my cousins, and especially the Kirkwoods, and other Mackays, and this common connection through the patriarch, and this common history, which Jim has confirmed goes back to Rogert, and starts in, well, you've got it back to 1750, William Mackay, right? In Rogert, Laird, between Rogert and Laird. So that's it. That's how it started. I mean,
Well, you're trying to mobilize the clan to save the log cabin, and by extension to save the whole site, because I wish we had do you have the Morrison report, like
Yes,
a
I
cover
do.
picture on it?
Yeah, I
That
do.
picture on the cover should be there, because that shows,
okay,
speak about the site as well as
There
the
you go.
cabin. No, go ahead.
okay. So,
Just hold it straight on.
yes, this is the Tom Morrison report, which has been done by a tremendously dedicated historical architectural consultant named Tom Morrison, who has been saving many sites and working them and rebuilding them. And this is his drawing, interpretive of how it was, the Fallbrook farm, as developed and initially settled by William McClure, who of course was an Irishman, in 1857. So you see, what you do see here, it might be quite difficult. At the bottom, which is the cornerstone, is the mill, and the foundations, the rock foundations that we showed you earlier, were the rock foundations here of the mill, and this is the mill race. Now this is what he first built when he came here with his wife in around 50 years of age. He'd already, he didn't have any family, and they knew that because the log house had no upstairs. So what he did first was they probably either lived in a sodden, simple habitation. They built the mill. This is the mill race, and if we look at the stream,
Can I help you a little bit?
yeah,
He first,
Go ahead.
we think he first set up just a simple sawmill, just a simple saw on a platform, probably not even covered, in order to skim the sides off the logs. The logs in this house are actually trimmed on the sides by a simple sawmill, and the lumber in the floor and the roof is sawn on one side by that same saw. Probably set up in here with us close to the water power and not needing so much power. Then when he decided on the grist mill a year or two later, he had to have more power, so he created this mill race so it would have another 20 feet of drop to come down, and that's where he built his grist mill, which was to serve the community and a means of livelihood for him, I expect. And it seemed like it lasted about maybe 15, 20 years at the most until it caught fire, and and burned, but this is his impression of the site, and so it's valuable for the raceway, it's valuable for the foundations of the mill, it's valuable for the ford here, which you can still cross, although there's a bridge now, and so on. But that's the site that we want to preserve, but because it's all part of the watershed and part of nature and part of the mandate of the Credit Valley Conservation Society authority to preserve it as it is and not risk any flooding or anything like that. They don't want anybody to touch it. They're trying to clear out even the house, and we're trying to preserve the whole site. So it's a big tug of war at the moment, and the Halton Council are going to decide, Halton Hills Town are going to decide whether to designate it as a historical site or not. And that meeting we hope is coming up in the next month or two, which would be April, May of 2009.
Yes, good. Now the native site, we speak often of the native site because the nature of this environment, the creek, where's my better pictures? Just a minute. There's a better picture. You know, a better, this one. Well, it's not that good anyways. It was a site that seemed to attract over at least the last 500 years native communities because it was 30 miles from Lake Ontario. It was relatively secluded and it was sort of a central meeting point, and so this native site that has been discovered about 10 years ago, yes, and actually has been explored by Laurentian University, University of Toronto, and the Ontario Heritage Trust, is at least 500 years old, and it's a very extensive village. And it might include also the land of Fallbrook, but we don't know yet. So, and the other fact is that this lower, this flat area too have been very, in front of the original farm, the log house, might been a good siting for, a good place for an Indian encampment, a native encampment. And then up on the hill they were more protected because the native site is just across the river and up. But as I was going to say, you can see in this original picture too, well, this is in July. This is in July or August because Aunt Rachel is there. There doesn't seem to be much water there coming through there, but boy, there's a lot of water coming normally, and as you see it goes down sort of in steps. And actually just behind here is where the mill race started. And our architect, historical consultant Tom Murrison, has found even traces of the mortier mortar that was originally used either to build
the dam that he put across the creek in order to generate his water power,
which he sent down the mill race, right? Yes, and of course to build the mortar they all had lime houses, lime kilns, and there's a couple on this property, and you see them around because that's how they made the mortar, right?
It may be too that because it was a waterfall, that it was good for fishing, something to do with the idea of a fish ladder.